past 24 months, as the COVID pandemic has unfolded and progressed, it revealed an inconvenient truth about just how precarious the financial affairs of middle-class households really are in this country. We now have so much more clarity and certainty around the fragility of our finances, with around 80% of households forced to confront the fact that they don't have enough savings, and most were around 1 month away from losing their homes. Now, inadequate savings, lack of financial planning, and little support from family and government, all these things contributed, right? But several things have become abundantly clear. We need to understand our debt position and how much savings are required to weather a storm, such as the loss of a job or a pandemic or health issues. And we also need to better assess the assets that we already have available to us and how we can use them to protect against future catastrophes and shore up our overall financial health as we build wealth for our families and prepare for retirement. Sometimes opportunities lie in the strangest of places. While there are reports that we are heading into a decade-long housing supply crunch, with reports that affordable housing is at an all-time low, and Sydney reporting a 5-year vacancy low rate of 1.7%, with many regional areas reporting much less than 1% vacancy, there are 13.5 million unused bedrooms in 10 million residences across Australia. And this is why I'm really excited to invite to the podcast today, Financial Foreplay, a good friend of mine, Ludwina Dodovic, the CEO and founder of the Room Exchange, Australia's first verified house sharing platform. The Room Exchange makes it so easy for people to find their ideal housemate based on personality, values, and even lifestyle factors. And you can choose to rent or rent offset, giving you the choice about how you want to use your valuable asset. Today, Ludwina and I are going to be talking about how your spare bedroom could be worth $10,000 a year in rent or over 300 hours of household help. I'm so excited to have you on today, Ludwina. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, Rondalyn, I'm so excited. I can't believe after all of these years that we've known each other, we're actually finally doing an interview. It's fantastic. Thank you for having me.
I know there's no time like the present. Better late than never, right?
I know. And look, I have to say that introduction that you wrote was incredible, and it really has couched our conversation really well. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Well, let's dive in because we've got a lot of ground to cover. Let's start by talking about, from your perspective, the impact that COVID has actually had on the average Australian middle-class household. What's changed?
Oh, look, I can probably just speak from my own perspective, and I think that would be relevant for pretty much everyone, although there's varying degrees, of course, but, some people have had absolute devastation happened in their lives where they've lost people and lost their homes and their businesses and their jobs. We were fortunate. We didn't get to that. In fact, I'm from Melbourne, and our goal was purely if we can just not lose anything over those 2 years, then I can accept that. But what we've come to realise is that there was so much insecurity around that time, and, nobody knew what was going to happen. Melbourne was pretty much the test case for, what COVID actually really meant for us. And I don't know what it was like for you, but it just seemed like every single day as we were watching the news, it was just more uncertainty, and then just having to deal with the level of uncertainty that was thrown at us all the time. So I don't know if I can really answer that question for everyone, but I just know that it's really left this feeling of we cannot be certain of anything. We can also be certain of the fact of having to live with a high level of uncertainty and it popping in our lap at any moment.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, you and I live in basically the same suburb and we didn't even see each other.
Oh, yeah, I know. I've been, actually just starting to get myself out now, and I still find it a little uncomfortable. And I was just like, I saw a friend the other day that I hadn't seen in about 3 years. And it was just really lovely to see him, and it felt like it was just yesterday. But I actually found myself having to relearn how to socialize again because, only being let out of your house for an hour a day just to exercise just really changes a lot about who you are.
And that's a huge element of this. There's a lot of people that are, doing it tough because they were living alone and they were stuck in their homes and they didn't have anybody that they could invite into their, circle because of all the lockdowns and restrictions. So mental health is a large component of this too, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, I would say that I'm pretty strong when it comes to protecting my mind and my own mental health. But I really struggled with it. And I had my husband and both of our adult kids actually came home for the first year of COVID. So for me, that experience was joyful. As, having adult children and they've already left home, it's very rare that you have that opportunity to spend that amount of time with them. But I had many friends who were living on their own. And also, my father-in-law, his wife passed away last year. So he had, time on his own as well. And it was just, it's incredibly lonely. I mean, it's incredibly lonely for people outside of the COVID time, let alone knowing that you don't have a choice about whether you can have someone over or not. I could not imagine what that would have felt like.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, look, you've been doing the room exchange for a few years now, but I'm guessing that this sort of whole COVID thing and having your children come back to home kind of helped an epiphany or a light bulb moment for you in terms of pivoting the business. Can you talk everybody through that?
Yeah. So I founded the company 5 years ago, and it was originally founded on what we called a pure exchange model, which was if you have a spare room, traditionally you would rent it or have guests sleep in it or use it as a home office or whatever. But for those who, maybe needed some at-home help, we realized that, and this came through my own experience, after my oldest son left home, my spare room ended up being used this way. It could be used to actually get some help around the house and then actually let somebody live there. So, if somebody came in, they offered roughly 2 hours a day of help around the house in exchange for food and accommodation. And how it actually began was when my eldest son left home for the first time, I saw his spare bedroom, cried, as you do when you first become an empty nester. And then I saw it as a cost center in my house. Now, the house that we're rent investors, so we have an investment property in Newport and then we rent where we live. And I was like, I'm actually paying for the rent of this room. And then this kind of realization happened that, well, why would I just have it sitting empty there? The rent was probably $500 a week or something. It was a 4-bedroom. So divide that. That's how much money I'm wasting each week. So I thought, how can I utilize it? So I did what a lot of people do, and I listed it on a short-term holiday platform for about a year. And I loved that, but I didn't like the 4 hours of work that it took to get the entire house hotel ready for a $50 a night random guest, every few weeks. So I stopped doing that, and then some friends of my kids were traveling, and they would come and stay, and it's just like, well, hey, why don't I love the energy, and I said, why don't you help us out a couple of hours a day, and we'll feed and house you, because they were sort of low on money, and that's how the idea started. And it was great in its origin, but as with all origin stories or all startups, they grow and they develop, and it's kind of like raising a child. You have this utopian view of what your child's going to be like when it's born, but then after a few years, you realize that it starts to develop its own personality and interacts with other people, and it starts to change your views on, what you think this child's going to develop into. It's the same with a business, and hopefully you have the courage to kind of let go of your original vision and let it grow. And so we came to a point that when COVID happened, we're a house sharing platform. So during COVID, no one's opening up their front doors. So we had two choices. We're either going to close up shop because we can't do business and we didn't know when we'd be able to, which then would mean that our shareholders would lose out and we'd lose out on our investment. Or we could look at what is life going to be like after COVID and how can we make some fairly safe assumptions and possibly build this into something that will be even better after COVID. And so one of, this idea of the room being this cost center in a house, how can we really work on that? And it was our model too rigid, just being purely exchange model. And we realized it was. So people might be looking for cash for the room, or they might be looking for help, or maybe they're looking for a mix of both. So that's how we ended up pivoting. We rebranded the company. We rebuilt the technology to cater for it. And now we're, as you said, Australia's first verified house sharing platform. We've always had the verification, but through our research and our survey, we found out that our users actually found that as being the most valuable value proposition that we had in our business. So we lead with that because there's no other house sharing platform where it's mandatory to be verified. With ours, it is. Our profiles have always been amazing. And one of the other things was, people objections about opening up their home and sharing their spare room was, I don't want to feel like I'm coming home to a stranger. And with our profiles, you can actually pick someone that feels like you're coming home to a friend. And then the third one is you can choose a traditional rental option, or you can choose a rent opposite, or a mix of both. It's completely up to you. So your asset, your spare bedroom, is a cost center, or it can actually provide resources for you, and it's just up to you on how you want to use that.
I'm giggling a little bit whenever you say that because you almost sound like an accountant. When you call the bedroom a cost center.
Well, it is. I mean, look at people's garages. They rent them out now, Like if you don't have a car or a shed full of tools like my partner does, then, like I can't walk in our garage because of all the tools in there, but other people's, they're empty and they rent them out, or, there's a myriad of things. You've got a caravan that sits in your driveway for most of the year and you only use it for about 4 weeks a year. You can list it on a caravan sharing platforms now. Like there's all sorts of things that people are realizing. Your car might be sitting out the front most of the time. You can list it on a car sharing, platform and better utilize it. How is the bedroom any different? The only way that the bedroom's been used primarily is in a typical sort of, flatmate kind of arrangement, which was something that, you're about my age group, so you'd relate to this. Do you remember back in your 20s where, you go down the pub and you'd see an A4 poster with tear-off phone numbers at the bottom and, bedroom for rent in a share house at Bondi in Sydney, I remember this, and rip off the phone number, call them up. You go and meet them at the house and have a beer and they go, yeah, you look all right, move in tomorrow, And that kind of used to be the...
suggesting we're still not in our 20s, Ludwina?
Oh, my gosh. Next birthday is leaning me towards the 60 end of life. But, like it's, or the spare bedroom today, and particularly in a lot of middle class houses, has been traditionally used for the short-term holiday platforms, which requires a stack load of work. And, it's really a business in your home. Well, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about, there's 13, your accountant and you will love this. There's 13.5 million unused spare bedrooms in Australia in 10 million homes.
Yeah.
That is where we've got a housing shortage, an affordable housing shortage. The rental market is absolutely screwed, as you mentioned, yet we have a glut of empty bedrooms. And a lot of them are in homes, they're single-person homes as well, as you also mentioned.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I would suggest that there's probably going to be specific or particular groups of people who are going to be doing it worse in terms of finding affordable accommodation as well, right? Like the students and maybe women who are leaving relationships. There are probably huge groups of people that are somewhat at risk.
Look, the interesting thing that we're learning since we relaunched a month ago is the demographic of the people. This is really, you'll love this. The people who we think are going to be the households who will open up their home, and the people who we think are going to be the housemates who want to rent, just blows me out all the time. We've recently had a 75-year-old man sign up as a housemate in Canberra. So he has a financial advisor, and so this financial agency who services, and their primary clients are aged people. They've helped him realise that he doesn't have enough money at this stage in his life to buy a place, but he has about $300 a week that he can utilise towards rent for the rest of his life. So he's looking for someone to rent with in Canberra. Now, he's quite likely, I'm assuming, might be happy living with someone who's roughly within the vicinity of 10, 15, 20 years of his age group. He can go in and find someone on our platform that suits him, or he might want to live with a younger person, you never know. But that really surprised me, that somebody of that age. And I was like, yeah, that's actually right. And then we have, as you mentioned, middle-aged women who find themselves single and can't afford to buy, but want to share a house, but wouldn't, go to a typical, I guess, flatmate type website to find a housemate or find someone who's like them. They will on our platform, or a couple who's just bought a house for the first time and wants to better utilize the space to help pay off the mortgage, or, maybe provide some resources or help in the house so that they can either save money through not paying for the help externally, or they just might want the company in the house. There's a myriad of reasons why people want a house share, and we can't actually pinpoint a dynamic because everybody's life and situation is different. And, we all know that majority of people are not going to be able to afford to buy a house for a while. So that puts them in the rental market. We know that the rental market is very slim. So people are looking for alternative ways to live.
Yeah, fair enough. Can you talk a little bit about the verification process and how it works? Because that might be, something that people who are listening to this right now would have no idea of what's involved in that.
Mm. Well, when we first launched the platform, it was a rule that I had. Like, I don't know why, but I just thought, look, if somebody's going to come into my house and I'm going to go to a platform, I think I want to at least know that there's been some form of verification check. And at that time, Digital ID by Australia Post had just launched, and we were one of their early adopters, and we're really excited to very easily integrate their technology into our system. So what happens is when you create a profile, there's a part of the profiling process where you have to have your digital ID, and then when you do, it shows up as a badge on your profile. Now, all you have to do is just click the verification button. A pop-up window opens up, and it tells you that you're within Australia Post Digital ID, and it will ask you to choose which form of ID you want to use: driver's license, passport, Medicare card, whatever it is. And as long as the information that is on your ID matches exactly the information that you've entered on your profile, then you will get your ID will be passed. If it's not, then you can go back to your profile and re-enter your information to the correct information. And when I say that, I don't mean that somebody's trying to necessarily be sneaky, but if your name is, say, Julie, for example, but you go by Jules, you might put Jules Smith, but really your name on your ID is Julie Smith, and you go, oh, okay, I have to go back and just put my, my ID name in there, and then you can select a preferred name after that, right, that is seen to the public. So it just gives you the option to do that. You can go back, and by the way, once you do actually get your digital ID, you can then download the app in the process of that, and that digital ID is on your phone, which you can then use at any participating Australia Post businesses that also require digital ID, whether it's for an ID pass or anything like that. And we actually pay for the digital ID. So even if you just went on a platform and registered and got your digital ID for free, that's even a bonus just there. But that's how it works. It's really simple, and, we pay for it because we want to reduce friction in the process of people signing up, and also means that everybody in our database is verified.
Yeah, that probably gives people quite a load of comfort, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Now, as you correctly pointed out, there's been this sort of shift, particularly in the last sort of 3 to 4 years, of people wanting to rent out their stuff. They're renting out their garden and, tools. They're renting out their vehicles. They're renting out all of these things. What do you think is the difference? Why do you think so many households haven't not yet realized to this point in time the potential that they're sitting on in terms of those unused spare bedrooms? What do you think is different about that?
I think there's something different post-COVID to pre-COVID. So I'll talk pre-COVID first. I think it's this, from the hundreds of hours of conversations that I've had with users, I'd say it's that this kind of fear of losing privacy, or maybe being, what's a word? I'll share an example. The first time that we started to do that, I noticed a slight change in my behaviour around my home, and it was really interesting. So Harry and I have been married, be 30 years in October this year. So we've been together a very long time, and you know, because I know you're married as well, that, or anyone who has a partner, after a certain amount of time of being together, you have this kind of dance, this rhythm of how you are at home and how you speak and how you dress and just how you are, right? When a visitor comes into your home, that shifts a little, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah, this is hopefully. So when when you have like your family come and stay, it's like the house is a little shinier and brighter, and your language is a little more polite, and you might give him a few hugs than normal. I don't know what it is. It's just this thing that happens when you have a visitor in your home, and I think it's this kind of this idea of, things might change a little bit, or you might lose some privacy, or you might lose some of your household personality or whatever. what I came to realize was that it was actually really beautiful because I started to see, I started to sort of sit back and notice, oh, maybe I could be a little kinder to Harry sometimes. It was kind of like, oh, it was just, and somebody else in your home, and just sort of like, it's almost like it's a stop and pause moment. I find it really lovely. I find the energy and the interest of having someone else in my home invigorating, and it teaches me something about myself and shows me something about myself, and also I can see my husband, through the eyes of somebody else, and appreciate more things about him in that way. It's a really interesting experience. And I think sometimes people kind of fear that a little bit, maybe. Or I've had a few conversations where people say, oh, yeah, but I won't be able to walk around the house naked anymore. And I'm just like, well, maybe just do it when they're not there. Like, it's not really like this thing that's going to massively change how you are in your home, but it just change it slightly. And so I think that's it. But then I think, well, all of the people have listed their spare bedrooms and short-term holiday platforms over the years. It's really no different to that. So it's just kind of, I think everyone has this sort of little bit of fear about it. But one of the things that I say is that you can trial it. You can say, well, look, how about we have someone for a month and just see how we feel about it? And, so you can list your home as only wanting someone for short term for a month. And so someone will only apply that wants to be there for a month, and then you can experience it and see what it's like and see the value that it gives you and how it can change your life and how it can enrich your life. And, like the stories that we talk about around the dinner table, the more that we actually sit down around the dinner table when we have someone in a home happens more frequently, and the dialogue that occurs, and the choice of movies that get sort of suggested to us, to languages that we can learn, to new styles of cooking that we can embrace, to having a walking partner every day. Like, there's all of these things that come out of opening up your front door and inviting someone into your home.
Yeah, I think a lot of those would potentially be really overlooked by people just if they're purely looking at this as a sort of income generating exercise. There's this whole other element that is really important to who we are as human beings and our connection.
Well, human beings we're meant to have connection. We're meant to live in, a tribal way. I heard this story recently. It's in a podcast I was listening to. I can't quote where it came from. Saying that, we used to live in tribes, and the tribe was almost like the village. The village was they were your people. You may not have been related to all of them, but the people in that village, that's where you knew that that's your place. That was your home, was the village, not the house that you live in. And now we call the house that we live in our home. But who lives in that house? It could just be one person. It could be you and your partner, or you and your partner and your kids. But where are your people? People are scattered all over the country, or maybe even internationally. We don't have that kind of tribal way of living. It's like, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm looking at the house across the street because I have this big window in my office here, and I hardly see the doors open. I hardly see engagement from neighbours. I sit out on my front porch often, and I'll pull my guitar out and just play, just so it can be a little bit of a Pied Piper kind of thing. People come and they listen and talk. Or, when I'm painting, my office is also in my art studios, and I open up the windows even at night, the blinds, so people can see there's something is happening in this house, and, please come and say hello and have a look at my art. Like, I long to have people around me and to be connected with people. And I think if people really ask themselves that question, they would say that they would agree with that. Now, post-COVID, what I just said really fits more into that. I think people have really realised the importance and the value of community and connection and people, and, sitting across the table and sharing a meal and conversation and dialogue and connection. I think we're really longing for that more, and we have a really big opportunity here to invite more of that into our lives and into our home, but to also have an impact and make a change in this awful housing crisis that we're in.
Yeah, and I know that you sort of say that the spare bedroom can return about $200 a week, right? If we're going to now talk about some of the financial aspects, because I can see how, all of this would dovetail together. If people could make $200 a week, or maybe get 8 or 10 hours a week of help, how does that financially change the household? Anecdotally speaking, what are your clients telling you about how this has changed their financial life as well?
Well, look, when you think about, I was doing some research this week actually, and you, the average rent for a room in the city of Melbourne's like $270 a week. In a house that I'm living in, it would be $200. So even if you average it out to say $220, let's talk say $12,000 a year. You're the financial whiz here. Like if you had a mortgage of $300,000 and you were 40 years old and you had a spare bedroom and you could knock $12,000 a year off that mortgage, how many years would it cut it down by? You
Quite a
know,
lot.
a lot. Or, if you put that into your self-managed super fund, and, obviously there's tax implications and you talk to your accountant about that. We're not an accounting firm here. But,
But on an average mortgage, let's just say somebody's got a $600,000 mortgage, which I don't think is outrageous, right? That kind of is pretty
really?
average.
600,000? Oh my God.
600,000, something like that. Most people, depending on their interest rate, are only really paying between sort of 15 and maybe 18 or so down. So by the time interest gets off the top, you're paying down 15 or 18. So essentially that's almost doubling the amount of principal that they're paying every year. So it would it would basically cut their mortgage down to a few years instead of 30 years. They'd be paying it out over sort of 8 or 9 years instead of 30 years.
Well, on our investment property, I made a decision this year to pay an extra $300. I just rounded it up to the next, $1,000 number. And I looked at it and it's like, oh my God, how's my mortgage been cut down by so many years? And I knew that it would cut it down a bit, but I didn't realize it would cut it down that much. Like, it's crazy. And we don't really miss that money each month, so.
I just did the math off the top of my head, so it's not going to be 100% perfect, but it's almost a doubling of your reduction of principal every year.
Wow. Yeah.
And it would obviously be more if your mortgage was lower.
Yeah.
If you had a smaller amount outstanding. And, we're in uncertain times. People are wondering, is the RBA going to put the rates up? We're starting to see banks not offering the same variable and fixed rates that they were offering just a few months ago, because there's this preparation or belief that the rates are going to go up. And, as rates go up, I think, people sometimes forget that if the interest rates doubled, a lot of people would lose their homes. There is an organization, Demographa, that ranks housing affordability. I don't know if you've seen these reports, and they rank housing affordability for all countries in the world. And Australia is the only country in the world where 76% of the population lives in what they deem severely unaffordable housing, which is the highest of the four quartiles, which is housing that is 6 or more times in value what you earn. So that just kind of gives you a visual picture of, but back in those days when maybe the rates went up to 18%, people weren't living in a house that was worth 6 or 7 or 8 times what they earned.
It's really interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because, it's one of the things I've been drilling into my kids. They're, 27 and 30 now, is that the importance of living within your means. And I was writing an article the other day and sharing about how our first house was a 2-bedroom, single-fronted terrace in Richmond. We renovated that and then sold, and then we bought a 3-bedroom. I was just had my second child. We bought a 3-bedroom in Newport, a corner acre block with trees. I just wanted a bit of land and 3 bedrooms. And the kids shared a room until they were 9 and 11, and the third room was my office because I've always worked for myself and worked from home. And then we subdivided, and then we built a house. It still only had 3 bedrooms, but had 2 toilets. So that was the upgrade. And then we converted the garage into a living room so that we sort of had a second living room as well. But all this time we still kept living within our means. And I just remembered that every single space in our house was always used. There was nothing that was wasted. In our garage that we converted into a living room in the new house, we had a sofa bed in there and we put a carpet rug on the floor. And so when we had guests, that's where they slept. And then during the day, that was my office. So there was kind of like this always, don't buy an extra bedroom if you don't need the extra bedroom.
You
It
make
was a
an
cost.
important point. You make a really
Yeah.
important point because growing up as a child, we, had some decent houses that we lived in. We never had a spare bedroom.
No.
We always had enough bedrooms
Yeah.
for each of us as kids, but that was it. And somewhere along the line, I don't know what point it was, all of a sudden people started buying these 5 and 6 bedroom houses when they only needed 2 or 3 bedrooms. So it's kind of fascinating, isn't it?
It
Just to
is, and then
remember.
when you think about the dynamic or the culture of the house, it's very separate. Everybody in their own space in the house, as opposed to being together.
Well, look, back in those days, and I'm sure you will.
Listen to us back in those days.
I instantly dated myself as being this ancient,
In your
mature woman.
50s.
But back in those days, we all ate at the dinner table
Yeah,
together. We didn't come, we weren't sitting in front of the TV. We
yeah.
weren't all on iPhones and iPads like that. Those things just didn't exist. The entire way that we operated as a family unit was so dramatically different to what we have now.
Yeah. And then when you were young enough to work, you were young enough to contribute too, right?
Yeah, look, I had my first job. I don't know about you. I had my first job selling shoes at when I was 14 years old. First
Yeah,
job.
well, yeah. I started modelling when I was 10. I think I started contributing to the household when I was about 13.
Yeah, I don't remember if my parents made me actually pay anything towards the house.
Oh, no. There was always a percentage of our income went to what they call board, right? So, and I'm glad that they did because it it taught us that it costs to live.
Well, and that's the big thing. I mean, I think there's this belief amongst the younger generation that you earn $1,000 a week and you spend 1,200. There's this misunderstanding that hold on here. We earn a certain amount goes to taxes. We need to save a percentage of that and invest and do all of these things. But I think what's happened is over the years, people's perceptions and attitudes and the systems that we have in place have become so poor that people aren't doing that. They're not protecting those assets anymore, which kind of leads to this whole thing of what we've been talking about, that 10 million households are sitting on 13.5 million rooms. And it hasn't even occurred to most of these 10 million households that room is worth something.
Yeah. Let me give you another stat to go along with that. So actually, Ernst & Young in 2019 did a housing accessibility report in Sydney. And what they learned was that if all of the unused spare bedrooms within a 30-minute radius from the city of Sydney were housed by a working adult, it would increase the New South Wales GDP by $750 million annually.
Unbelievable.
And most of those spare bedrooms are in homes of empty nesters and elderly people, which is really interesting because we've also got an issue with, people wanting to age at home and the practicalities of that, which could be another conversation. But one of the other issues that are popping up at the moment is I'm getting a lot of interest from coastal and country towns who can't get staff because there's no rentals available to house the staff. So I have an interview next week in Geelong with 2 politicians who are going to be talking to me about that issue and if the room exchange can actually help provide a solution for that, because obviously the towns have got spare bedrooms.
If the regional vacancy rates are below 1%.
Because people have left the cities to go to the regional areas.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to get people to do the work if they have nowhere to live.
Exactly.
Doesn't make sense.
Mm.
Well, look, you and I could probably talk about this, I reckon, for another 3 hours.
We could.
We might lose a few of the listeners by then. But look, suffice it to say, I think that we'll continue to have this conversation, and no doubt I will be inviting you back again to talk about kind of how things have morphed or pivoted. Maybe even in 12 months' time, you'll probably have a lot more information that you can share with me and with the listeners. But if people do want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it? And I'll actually put your contacts information into the show notes, but just let people know.
So it's theroomexchange.com. Across the social, it's the same at The Room Exchange. And if you want to get in touch with me personally and directly, just go to my LinkedIn. So Ludwina Dordevic on LinkedIn. and shoot me a message there, particularly if, you want to have further discussions about any area of this, whether it's, media or if you have a business that you think would be a great partner with us. We're also looking at, ancillary services for people who want to actually, incorporate their services with what we're doing to better support our users. And we also have the Room Exchange podcast, and it's on all major podcast directories as well. And that's all about helping people rent better.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing this, because I think that, if there's people out there listening right now, and maybe you're still struggling a little bit off the back of COVID, maybe you're starting to think, how do I save and get a bit of a nest egg? How do I pay down my mortgage quicker? It could be just as simple as renting out your spare room. So that doesn't include you selling stuff. That doesn't include you having to have a side hustle or any of, things that could be intrusive to the way that you live your life. It's just simply inviting somebody in your home and maximizing the value of the asset that you already own and are working towards paying off. So thank you so much. And I wish you the very best, Ludwina.
Oh, thank you, Rondalyn. I really appreciate the conversation. It's been enthralling.
Yes, except for you're trying to tell us that we're old. That's the only part of it.
We're in the other side of life now. We've done all the hard work. Now we get to sit back and just kind of revel in it all.
Yeah, fair enough. But we should be on the downward slide any minute. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.